been in my office before. I'm glad you're here. So I'm Dr. Firnhaber, most of you know that. And my goal in practice and doing these talks is to help educate our community to make Lincoln a healthier place to live. Now tonight we're going to be talking about vaccines. I'm not going to be going over the COVID vaccine. I have a special talk on that. I'm going to go over vaccines in general. My goal is not to tell you, yes, you should get vaccinated or you shouldn't. It's just to give you information to where you can make an informed decision either for yourself or for your kids. All right, so we're going to skip over some of these slides here to, here we go, right here. So there's a lot of scientific research on immunization that's not being presented to the public. And immunization has reduced some childhood diseases, but we're going to look at, there's been a cost to this. If you look at the current vaccine schedule, and this figure here may have gone up since I did this talk, since I originally put this together. Your child may get 27 or more dosages of vaccine before the time they're 6 years old. They may receive another 23 or more by 7th grade. By the time your child is 18, they receive anywhere from 108 doses. Now, does that seem like a lot?
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid in the 60s, I mean, I made 3 or 4, 5, and I'm doing okay, So that's a lot. So Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, a PhD immunologist, and I heard this, actually heard her admit this, that babies do not produce antibodies until about the age of 1. So if this is the case, why do we immunize children at all before age 1? If they cannot produce antibodies to vaccines, why are we immunizing them? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so the immune system, come on in. The immune system is just like any other system in our body. It takes time to develop the immune system. So a baby, if you ask a baby to get up and run, can it do it?
No.
Absolutely not. No, because it takes time to develop the nervous system and the musculoskeletal system. What's the same thing for the immune system? It takes time to develop the immune system. So why would we give a baby or a toddler vaccines when their immune system isn't developed enough to produce antibodies? That's one of the big issues here. Now, this talk is going to be divided into 6 sections. Number 1, are the ingredients of vaccines safe? What indirect adverse events can be linked to vaccination? How do vaccines work? How effective are they? Is there a correlation between the number of vaccines given and infant mortality and morbidity, and then conflicts of interest in vaccine research? I always try and keep my talks to a half an hour if I can. So, are the ingredients of vaccines actually safe? So vaccines contain lots of different things. It's not just an attenuated or a dead virus. A lot of things. So they have preservatives, okay? Just like junk food has preservatives to keep a long shelf life. So do vaccines. For example, thimerosal, which is a mercury. Now, they've taken mercury out of a lot of childhood vaccines, but it's still in the flu vaccine. Okay, adjuvants to help stimulate a stronger immune response. So aluminum would be one of those adjuvants. So we're going to find out in a little bit aluminum is toxic to the brain. In fact, in some ways, aluminum may be more toxic than mercury. Stabilizers to keep the vaccine potent during transportation or storage. So that could be a sugar or a gelatin. Where does gelatin come from?
Horse hooves.
Bone?
Ground up horse hooves,
Yeah.
Cartilage and hogs and horses and things like that.
Same thing in your hair and your fingernails.
Yeah,
Yeah.
could be that. So, Well, I don't know about fingernails. But cell culture materials used to grow vaccine antigens. For example, they can grow them in eggs, sometimes human fetal cells, which I think is atrocious, and various other culture media. And then inactivating ingredients used to kill viruses, for example, formaldehyde. So do you think it's a good idea to shoot formaldehyde into a child? Probably not, okay? And then antibiotics to help prevent contamination for bacteria. For example, neomycin is in some vaccines. So, like I said, thimerosal, which is methyl mercury, was taken out of childhood vaccines in 2001, but it's still used in multi-dose flu vaccines. So I will never get a flu vaccine, okay? Never have had one, never will get one. In fact, one of my older patients used to work over at a assisted living home on O Street, big one across the street from the mall. I'm pretty sure that's the one she worked in. And she asked me one year, it's about 8 years ago, she said, should I get a flu vaccine? And I said, absolutely not, don't get it, because they're pressuring her to get it. And so she didn't get it. But everybody else in the building got one. Well, everybody else in the building got the flu except for her. She's the only one that didn't get it, you know? So what does that say about it? So let's look at some studies. One important study, and this is out of the journal called Metabolic Brain Disease, January of 2016. Mercury is a neurotoxin and potentially one of the main environmental triggers for autism spectrum disorder, as it induces neuroinflammation with subsequent release of neuropeptides. Blood levels of mercury were significantly higher in ASD children than in healthy control children. So the routine administration of thimerosal containing childhood vaccines has become a significant source of organic mercury exposure. And again, they don't really give them anymore, but like if you were born like before 2001, you got vaccines with mercury. It's just the way it was, okay? It's estimated that some children receive more than 50% of mercury exposure in early childhood from routine childhood vaccination. And that's from a journal, and I have this study in my office. Dose Response is the name of this journal. Epidemiological studies show significant associations between exposures to increasing dosages of mercury from thimerosal containing hepatitis B vaccines administered within the first 6 months of life, and increasing long-term risk of a child being diagnosed with autism or ADD, ADHD. Again, this is from that same journal, Dose Response. So let's look at aluminum. So as thimerosal was being eliminated from child vaccines, aluminum was being added. Remember, aluminum makes it gives you a stronger immune response. So let's look at some facts about aluminum. It's an environmental toxin with a negative impact on human health, especially the nervous system. So has anybody in here ever heard of the association between aluminum and not autism, but Alzheimer's? There is an association there, okay? So dietary aluminum is absorbed at a very low rate, 0.25%, whereas aluminum from vaccines may absorb at well over 50% in the short term and 100% in the long term. So why is this? Why is this here? What's going on here?
Body gets used to it, goes in quicker. I don't.
There's a huge difference between ingesting something in your mouth and it being shot into your bloodstream, okay? For example, if you took snake venom through your mouth, it's a protein, your body would probably break that down and you wouldn't have near the reaction, maybe not any reaction at all. If they inject it right into your blood, that's a whole different thing. And that's what they're talking about here. You know, when you inject things right into your bloodstream, that you're bypassing a whole lot of things in your body. And so that's a lot different. Aluminum adjuvants are immune stimulating and have neurotoxic properties to which infants are routinely exposed. That's from the Journal of Inorganic Biochemistry, September of 2017. So again, there's a vast difference between injecting a toxin into your blood and ingesting a toxin via the diet. So toxic actions of aluminum in the nervous system, it really does a lot of nasty things. It disrupts nerve connections, misfolds proteins, causes oxidative stress and inflammation. So a current study in the Journal of Trace Elements in Medicine and Biology, this is March of 2018, was the first study to quantify the aluminum content of brain tissue from donors with the diagnosis of autism. The access tissues came from 10 donors with autism who had died. So they took 10 kids that have autism, and these kids died of something, I don't know what, and then they looked at their brains and looked at how much aluminum did they accumulate, okay? And here's what they found. The aluminum content of brain tissue from donors with autism spectrum were extremely high. The aluminum was found in neurons, microglia, meninges, vasculature, gray and white matter. So this implies that aluminum had crossed the blood-brain barrier and was taken up by the microglial cells of the brain, which are cells that are involved with the immune system. The fact that we found aluminum in every sample of brain tissue suggests very strongly that individuals with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder have high aluminum in their brains, and that aluminum is associated with non-neuronal cells, including microglia and other inflammatory monocytes. So this is, again, the microglia are part of the immune system of the brain. So this is the journal Current Medical Chemistry 2011. So it says, in our opinion, the possibility that vaccine benefits may have been overrated and the risk of potential adverse effects underestimated has not been rigorously evaluated in the medical and scientific community. Why is that? Why are they not?
Too much money to be made in vaccines.
I think that's probably one thing, for sure. What else?
Too much power.
Okay. Meaning what?
Meaning do this, or we take away your license, or what have you.
Okay. I think that vaccine is like the holy of holies for medicine, immunization. It's also been regulated by the FDA. We're gonna see this later on. If vaccines were rigorously studied and were found to be harmful, what would that say about the FDA regulation process? You'd make them look pretty stupid. Okay. Not only that, but what would all these physicians and pediatricians who push vaccines, what would it make them look like? Not very good. Okay. So, I mean, there's not a lot of reason. I mean, you'd think that protecting kids would be enough reason, but
well, that goes both ways, though, because you put the fear factor into it. When you look at Ozempic, or you look at any of these drugs that people want to lose weight, they'll tell you all the good side effects of it, but at the very end, commercial may cause this, rectal bleeding, nosebleeds, dietary dysfunction, all that. It's just a fear-mongering. All it is big pharma trying to scare people into buying their stuff.
So why do you think, let me ask you this, when they hear all those side effects, why do you think people will take the drug anyway?
Because they want to hear what they want to hear.
So they don't think they're going to get those side effects. They're going to be the exception.
Yeah,
right?
It's fear-mongering.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So let's look at contamination in vaccines. This is another really interesting study, International Journal of Vaccination, 2017. David Brownstein is a medical doctor in Detroit. He's written lots of different books.
I know who he is.
A study by Italian researchers studying the safety of 44 vaccines currently used in use found the following. This is 44 vaccines. They found these inorganic foreign bodies in all human use vaccines. They were not declared on the package inserts by the manufacturer. So lead particles were found in the cervical cancer vaccine Gardasil, the flu vaccine, and the meningitis vaccine. Other vaccines were found to be contaminated with stainless steel, iron, chromium, and the heavy metal, nickel. GlaxoSmithKline's Fluarax vaccine for children was found to contain 11 different metals. Now, we don't know, I mean, nobody really knows. You shoot that into kids, what's going to happen? These are heavy metals. You're not supposed to shoot nickel into the bloodstream of a child, or chromium, or any of this stuff.
Right.
Okay, so I thought it was a very interesting study. Other problems with foreign objects: these metals are non-biodegradable. They can cause inflammation around the site of injection, may be carried by the blood to distant parts of the body where they may induce arthritis or autoimmune disease. What does that remind you? A little bit of the COVID vaccine. And they have much more serious impact on small children. I mean, kids don't have the detoxification capacity to handle stuff like that. Their livers just aren't that well developed. So environmental toxins accumulated in the diet can combine with toxins in the vaccine to make them even more toxic to children. So anybody ever hear of Dr. Stephanie Seneff? She's pretty well known in the scientific community, especially she was one of the really big early opponents of the COVID vaccine because she really looked closely at it. She's a researcher at MIT, and she's getting up there in age. She's probably 75 now. But here's what she said. What I think people don't appreciate is that vaccines and glyphosate are synergistically toxic. The glyphosate is making the chemicals in the vaccine much more dangerous to the children than they otherwise would be. If I were a young mother today, I would try very hard to get out of all vaccines that contain aluminum, mercury, and glutamate. That's a pretty big list. That's DTaP, hepatitis B, MMR, measles, flu shot, all of those. I would like to eliminate them. Pretty interesting, you know. What about the cell culture that the disease portion of the vaccine is grown in? Well, a study reported that the autism rate really jumped sharply. And we're going to talk about autism here in a little bit. In 1980 to 81, there's a real big jump in autism. Now, that was the first year I got into chiropractic. I started practice was 81. With the introduction of vaccines manufactured with fetal cell lines containing fetal and retroviral contaminants. Another jump occurred in 1988 corresponding to 3 factors. The addition of the second dose of MMR, a highly successful measles vaccine campaign, which raised compliance from 50 to 82% between those 2 years. It was a year I started practice in Hastings. And then the introduction of the polio vax in 1987. Do you remember, I think these 2 big drugs came out that year. Remember the 2 huge drugs that came out in 1987? Anybody remember? Huge. One was Prozac.
Yes.
The other one was the cholesterol drug. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Lipitor.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 huge drugs that big blockbuster drugs that came out in 1987. I remember that because I was in Hastings and at the time, and I remember our physicians were starting to prescribe those. And in 1995, autism rates jumped again in response to the introduction, the varicella vaccine, Varivax. All of these vaccines are manufactured with fetal cell lines. So vaccines and food proteins. So again, if you take a protein and you eat it, you can handle that pretty well. And I really wonder sometimes, if you put rattlesnake venom on something and ate it, I wonder if you'd get sick because your body would break that down. I mean, I'm not telling you guys to do that, okay? But I wondered about that. But you inject protein like egg protein or peanut protein into your body, that's a whole different thing, okay? I couldn't find a human being. A dog was the only thing I could find there to illustrate that. So an Institute of Medicine study in 2011 confirmed two facts. Food proteins exist in vaccines, and these proteins cause food allergies. Food allergies caused by vaccines may be only diagnosed weeks or months after vaccinations. Most vaccines contain more than enough allergens to contain or to cause sensitization. So, and a lot of these vaccines are grown in egg protein. Okay, this is the Journal of Developing Drugs, October 2015. Vaccines contain eggs, casein. Where do we get casein from?
Milk.
Milk, okay. Gelatin, we already talked about that. Soy, agar, polysorbate 80, and sorbitol, which is sourced from coconut, palm, sunflower, tapioca, wheat, corn, and other vegetable oils. Allergens in vaccines are causing life-threatening food allergies. Now, think about it. Let's go back. When I was a kid, okay, it was the 60s, maybe 60s, okay. Kids didn't have peanut allergies back then. They just didn't. They didn't have autism back then. They weren't fat back then.
They didn't have cancer.
They didn't have cancer. When I was in high school, we had one girl that got cancer in her leg, and she had to have her leg amputated right above her knee. I remember that. So that actually happened, but it was very, very rare, things like that to happen. And that happened about like 1969 when I was in high school. But you didn't hear, none of the problems that you see, nobody was on antidepressants, even though, there are things that happened during that time that were depressing, but nobody's taking antidepressants, The only drug that was available, like, to alter your mind or depression was Valium. Now, that was a fairly big deal back then. But things have changed a lot. So how do vaccines work? So T helper cells, which come from the thymus, which is right here, are a vital part of the immune system. They're lymphocytes that recognize foreign pathogens, or in the case of autoimmune tissue, normal tissue. So T helper cells produce cytokines, which are inflammatory cells in the immune system, which are hormonal messenger proteins that are responsible for the biological effects in the immune system. So whenever you hear that word cytokine, and you may hear it in other presentations or other contexts, but always a cytokine is the biochemical alphabet of the immune system. That's what that is. And they produce inflammation primarily. So you have Th1 cells are called cell-mediated immunity. They're pro-inflammatory and they're involved in the development of organ-specific autoimmune disease. Th2 cells are humoral immunity and they produce antibodies. They tend not to be inflammatory and are involved in systemic autoimmune disease and other chronic conditions. So let's look at this. Th1 and Th2 should be in balance. So we have both of these parts of our immune system. Everybody's got them, and we need them, but they need to be balanced. An illness will skew this balance in one direction or the other, but the body's always working to bring it back, And when you can't bring it back, that's when you get chronic disease, especially chronic autoimmune disease. Chiropractic helps with this. It helps with this balance of Th1 and Th2. So certain vaccines,
What are Th1 and Th2?
they're parts of the immune, they're cells in the immune system.
Uh-huh.
They're helper cells in the immune system.
Uh-huh.
And they have to be in balance.
Okay.
And when they're out of balance, they create problems like autoimmunity. Okay? So certain vaccines have shown to elicit a Th2 response, while others create a Th1 response. So many children who have chronic illnesses at the Th2 skew have chronic allergies and asthma. Okay? Anybody know kids like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of, yeah. I mean, you suffered with it for a long time. Absolutely. Repeated immunization from Th2 type vaccines can be involved. Children skewed to the Th1 have juvenile diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis. So not all kids get all this stuff from vaccines, but they can, okay? Now, how effective are immunizations? Research published in 2012 found that 81% of 2010 California whooping cough cases in people under 18 occurred in those fully up to date on the whooping cough vaccine. Okay? It also confirmed that cellular pertussis vaccines only stimulate a type of immunity that lasts about 3 years at best. Okay? So, in New England Journal of Medicine study, this was New England Journal of Medicine 2012, reported that after the 5th dose of DTaP, diphtheria, pertussis, and something else.
Is it tetanus?
Tetanus, yeah, tetanus and pertussis. The odds of acquiring whooping cough increased by an average of 42% per year. In an article published in the journal Pediatrics, it estimates that for pertussis vaccine efficacy have been that estimates have been inflated due to the case definitions adopted by the World Health Organization in 1991. That was the journal Pediatrics, May of 2012. Remember this one? Remember that big outbreak of whooping cough back in Tallahassee? And I remember that. That was really big news. 26 students contracted the cough. The majority of students were fully vaccinated against whooping cough, according to the CDC recommended schedule. In one classroom in which all students had received the pertussis vaccine, 50% still developed whooping cough. Let me ask you this. Does anybody in here know people that got all the vaccines for COVID and still got COVID? Yeah, I do. Some of my relatives did. I have patients that did, okay? What about studies comparing long-term health of vaccinated children with unvaccinated children? This to me is one of the most interesting parts about this talk. So the Journal of Translational Science, April 2017, the study looked at 666 homeschooled children. 405 were vaccinated, 261 unvaccinated. Vaccinated children were significantly less likely to have had chickenpox, pertussis, or rubella. So what this shows is that kids that are vaccinated for these things get these less, okay? Now, how many got like chickenpox growing up? Man, I did.
I had 6 months.
Yeah, I'm glad I got it. Lifetime immunity, Yep. I didn't get pertussis or rubella, but I got chickenpox. The vaccinated children were more likely or more significantly more likely than the unvaccinated to have been diagnosed with ear infections and pneumonia. No significant differences were seen in regards to hepatitis, high fever in the past 6 months, measles, mumps, meningitis, or influenza. This is from Vaccines and Autism from Peter McCullough. And this is really recent, okay? Does anybody know who Peter McCullough is? Yeah. He's published more peer-reviewed research papers on COVID than any other human being alive, okay? He said in 1960, autism affect 1 in 10,000 kids. Now it's 1 in 36. That's just astounding. It's the biggest childhood epidemic in history. It appears to be associated with the expanding vaccine schedule. A child today may face 108 shots or dosages. If a child gets sick with a big round of shots and has a seizure, there's a good chance they will develop autism. 200 studies link excessive childhood vaccines to autism. 200 studies. Anybody ever hear of those studies? Never hear about it, okay? And, he's paid a huge professional price for his stance on the COVID vaccine and other vaccines. He was like head of, he had a department chair position at Baylor Medical School and was very well respected. And when he started speaking out against the COVID vaccine, just based on his own research, his own studies, he got fired. Vaccinated children were significantly more likely than the unvaccinated children to have been diagnosed with the following. Basically, this is sinus infection, 10.4% versus 0.4%. Allergies, 22 versus about 7%. Eczema and dermatitis, 9.5% versus 3.6%. Learning disability, 5.7%, about 3 or 4 times the chance of a learning disability. ADHD, 4.7 times. ASD, autism, 4.7 to 1%. Any neurodevelopment disorder, you have 3 times the chance, at least over 3 times, if you've been vaccinated versus unvaccinated. Any chronic illness, 44% versus 25%. So this just shows that unvaccinated kids are healthier than vaccinated kids. Human and experimental toxicology, this is May of 2011. A study examined 34 countries and compared infant mortality with the number of vaccines given to children. The result, the more vaccines, the higher the infant mortality. The U.S. required the most vaccines and had the highest infant mortality of all 34 countries. Here's an interesting fact on the COVID vaccine. No extra charge for this information, by the way. So, per unit of population, the United States had 4 times the number of deaths of other countries. Why is that? From COVID. And we had more access to the vaccine, more access to hospitals, more access to masks. We had 4 times the number of COVID deaths than other countries, than the next highest country. Why is that? You tell me.
So the COVID vaccine, they kept wanting us to get more and more and more boosters.
But there's a lot of people that were not vaccinated that died in hospitals.
Right.
So what caused, and vaccines admittedly weren't nearly as well available in some of the third world countries. Why would the United States have 4 times the amount of deaths than other countries? Why is that?
You talking about in the hospital?
What?
You talking about in the hospital?
In or out of the hospital, doesn't matter.
Big pharma, and they try to push it on you. That's their moneymaker.
Diet.
I wouldn't agree with you on that one. Okay,
Yeah,
I'll tell you
they
what I
want the
think
money part.
in a minute, because not everybody that died was taking huge amounts of pharmaceuticals. There were some. You're right. Right, remdesivir was not a very good drug at all. But why would the United States have 4 times? Why that much?
Because we're heavily vaccinated otherwise?
Okay, maybe. Here's what I think, and here is what others think as well, is that we're a country that's not very healthy.
Nope.
And most people are walking around with high levels of inflammation, high levels. I see it all the time when I do blood work. And when your body's inflamed, you cannot, you're just not as able to fight off disease and problems as you are if you're not inflamed. And how do I know that our country's inflamed? Well, I look at the blood work I do, but also 70% are either overweight or obese. Those people are, the vast majority of those people are walking around with inflammation. When you're inflamed, you cannot handle things like COVID nearly as well. Not even close. Okay? If you're inflamed and you go in for a back surgery, my opinion of that is you're probably not going to have a very successful surgery. So the people in this country just carry a lot more inflammation than most of the rest of the world. That's the reason. Okay, conflicts of interest. We're going to go through this pretty fast. So there's a lot of conflicts of interest in vaccine safety research. Research that touts the safety of vaccines and insists there's a link between vaccines and neurological disorders is often disseminated, let's see, by medical journals who have a financial, let's see, does that make sense?
I don't know, you typed it.
Yes, up there.
That does make sense to me for some reason. Let's go to the next one. Okay, vaccine manufacturers. Vaccine manufacturers sponsor most of the research on vaccines. Studies show that financial interests of researchers are positively associated with the outcomes of favorable to the sponsor in medical studies. Well, you see this in all kinds of pharmaceuticals. Once vaccine manufacturers have met the regulatory hurdles for vaccine approval, they have little incentive to research the safety of their products. So why do they need to look for, once the FDA has approved it,
Yeah.
why do they need to spend money on anything else?
Right.
With the Food and Drug Administration, there's 3 conflicts of interest. The FDA protects the public by assuring all these things are safe. So sponsoring research that finds a link between vaccine and autism would really damage the credibility of the FDA. So they're not going to do that. Pharmaceutical companies pay a fee to the FDA to have their drugs evaluated. These fees paid by the drug manufacturers provide incentives for the FDA to be more friendly to the industry, since it's dependent on the industry for funding. Which, anybody think that's stupid or it's crazy? Okay, both the FDA and the Division of Vaccine Injury Compensation are under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. If the FDA provided evidence that vaccines cause autism, it would be providing evidence for claims filed within its own agency. So there would be a definite conflict of interest there. The CDC mandate is to prevent and control disease, injury, and disability. If vaccines were shown to be hazardous and associated with neurological injury, it would be forced to concede that its policies actually promoted disease and disability. Not going to do it. Okay, so many of the officials at CDC see their job as a stepping stone to the very companies that they're regulating. So they're not gonna pull the rug out from under the companies that they want to get lucrative jobs with. So there's a lot of compromise there. So last slide. Vaccines, like all drugs, should be considered after all the information has been evaluated. So whether you decide to get vaccinated or not is up to you. Whether you have kids that you're going to vaccinate, that's up to you. But you at least have a little bit more information on vaccines now than you did before. And I would say this, to me, the greatest thing you can do for your health is just keep yourself healthy. Eat a whole food diet, exercise like this guy right here, who exercises a lot, and get chiropractic care so you can keep your immune system and your nervous system healthy. And if you're unsure about chiropractic, come in and get checked. We'll be glad to at least check you out. And if you need it, great. If you don't, we'll send you to someone else. Yes.
Oh, need it.
What?
I need it.
Okay. Well, good. We'll be happy to at least check you out. Yeah. Terry?
Why is the mother hen and a chick on that box?
I have
What
no
for?
idea.
Yeah, what for? Why did you do that?
Maybe because it was, I don't know, maybe it was
Is
grown
it
in eggs.
derived from a chicken, which, bird flu's going around?
Or eggs. Maybe it was, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
I got a question, Doc.
Yes.
So, growing up being vaccinated as a kid, beyond your control, things like that, or like my own kids on certain vaccines, how can we help detox their bodies or keep inflammation down or help counter some of this? Is it just like you said with whole food diets and exercise, or is there additional nutritional sources they can take? Has there been any studies on that?
That's a good question. I think that doing a whole food diet, keeping the liver really healthy with cruciferous vegetables, which helps your phase 1, phase 2 detoxification, is really important. I think one of the best things anybody can do is not get their kids vaccinated until they're about 4 years old. At least wait, if you're going to do it. And another one is, if you vaccinate your kids and they get a fever, don't give them Tylenol, because that really destroys brain tissue. And there's some really good studies on that. So, but once you've done it, then you just keep them as healthy as you can, and again, my solution is exercise, a good clean diet, lots of vegetables in the diet, good cruciferous vegetables. You can even, put them on a good supplement that will increase their immunity, and I think chiropractic care is a really solid alternative, and those are the things that I do, okay, and for my own health, so that's what I would suggest. But if you've already vaccinated your kids, you just do the best you can.
Well, the older one, so out of the 5, the older ones, we didn't know a lot of this information, and then with the younger 2, we started to understand a little bit, maybe this isn't right. So are there any vaccines on the market that we should even entertain, in your opinion, or are they not even necessary?
If it were my kids, I wouldn't do any of them. That's how I look at it. And Peter McCullough, in this lecture I heard him talk about, said that, he said, if you just look at vaccinated kids versus unvaccinated kids are just healthier. And you saw the figures up there. I wouldn't. I know lots of families who don't vaccinate their kids, and their kids do fine, And when I was a kid, I was born in '53. There was a polio epidemic going on back then, and so, people were vaccinating then. Now there's some, controversy on whether the epidemic was going down at the time that we're vaccinated. I'm not going to get into that. But that was a big deal back then, and people were being put in iron lungs, and there was a lot of fear and all of that. So, but now, I think if you just keep people healthy, they're not going to get all this stuff. I didn't get COVID. I was exposed to it a lot. I never got it, and I think just keeping yourself healthy is the key.
There were oral polio vaccines.
Yeah.
Everybody went to the school.
Sugar cube.
Yeah. I remember that.
Except for one Christian Science family that didn't go. The neighborhood paid attention in those days.
Yeah, I remember those when I was a kid. Yeah. So that's when I always told my parents, when I grow up,